For thousands of years, mankind has been searching for some of the greatest ancient artifacts of all time. And only one man was divinely guided to find some of the greatest discoveries of all time, Ron Wyatt. He found Sodom and Gomorrah out in the middle of the desert, and you clearly see it's a very real place. It's a very real city that was literally rained down upon with fire and brimstone and burned to the ground. He found the Rock of Horeb, which stands over 5 stories tall, and water came out of the center. He found the Ark of the Covenant, a 900-pound throne, literally made of gold. He found the exact location where Jesus was crucified. He found the location where Moses parted the sea. He found the location where Mount Sinai is, where the 10 Commandments were written on in stone. He also found Noah's Ark in Turkey on Mount Ararat, and he found a very mysterious cave underground in Jerusalem that 4 angels are guarding to this very day. What you're going to see now is the remains of an ancient city, Sodom and Gomorrah. A place that's written about in the Bible because the people there were so evil, they were so violent, they were committing sins that were absolutely atrocious in God's eyes, to the point where enough is enough, and he literally rained down fire and brimstone upon these cities. Now this is Ron Wyatt here, and behind him there is a building that was burning at about 4,000 or 5,000 degrees, so hot that it literally vitrified the buildings into like a molten lava-like substance. And you can clearly see that this city is very different from the background. You see a white ash-like substance that is all through the city from where it burned to the ground, and the ashes are heavier than the actual buildings were before they were burned. So that's why the ash is still there almost 4,000 years later. Now when the team went to check out things there, they literally found pieces of the city and they put them in their hands and could crumble them right in their hands like talcum powder. So the whole city has turned to ash. And this is what happens when you don't follow God's laws. When you go lawless and do whatever you want to do, this clearly looks like a war zone. You can see the rooftops, you can see the horizontal lines there, you can see all of the tons of ash that have accumulated on top of the rooftops, on the sides of the buildings there, but you can see the vertical columns. You clearly see what looks like a war zone, and that's exactly what it was. It was a war between God and all the evil people that were living in these cities doing evil things. Now this is the entrance to the city here, and you clearly see all of these stone buildings that are still standing today on top of all of the hills that surround the city. And you can clearly see the piles. Look at the ash. Look at that. The ash goes up maybe 5 stories up the side of those buildings to the top there. In fact, it's amazing these buildings are still standing up almost 4,000 years later. I can't even imagine what these people must have been thinking, because this happened at nighttime. So they're in complete darkness, and all of a sudden fire starts raining down upon them. Now you can see the windows clearly there in the structures, and that's a ziggurat right there. And they actually have a ziggurat, which is a pyramid structure with windows and doorways and all kinds of things going on there. But clearly you can see the mounds of ashes in the whole city. You can see columns and towers and all kinds of different archways, 90-degree angles obviously, and you can see like above there, you can see like the crown molding where the roof is, around the roof of the edge, and you can see the 90-degree angles there clearly. So this shows you that this city has been thoroughly hidden from the public for many, many centuries, for thousands of years. And people didn't know until they started walking into the city and seeing stone buildings like this that are completely vitrified to such a level that this had to be burning at 4,000 or 5,000 degrees temperature to be able to melt stone to such a length like this. So this is mind-blowing to see something like this. Sodom and Gomorrah is very real, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who thought this was just something in a Bible story, it's not a story, it's a real location. And you can go there and you can clearly see the vitrification in all of these stone buildings. And the walls, everything has been completely burned to the ground. Now, they're still standing. I don't know how that works, but you clearly can see like buildings like this. You'll see the angles there. It looks like a staircase or something, but you can see what clearly are 2 walls there that are coming down at angles that, could clearly show you that intelligence was put behind the thought when they made this city, and it was made out of stone. It's very difficult to build with stone. So when you see that all of this has been built with stone, and it's all been thoroughly burned through, like some kind of a war zone, like out of, the worst nightmare you can imagine, you clearly can see that you have structures that are still there today. And again, Ron Wyatt discovered this, and there's more to this story, a lot more to it that I will tell you about here in a moment. But just know that this is probably going to happen again, because God doesn't like what's taking place down in his kingdom down here. Now here we can see the remains of what looks like a sphinx, and it is clearly burned thoroughly through from the sulfur. You have white ash there that remains there, but it's amazing it's still standing. Over there to the left is what looks like a tower, and if you take a closer look at it, it's a circular tower that's right there where the entrance to the city. This looks like a castle that is literally surrounded by a moat all the way around this entire castle, and the moat obviously is dried up, there's no water. This is an archway entering into a building, and you clearly see the archway there. You see the 90-degree angles and the erosion and the burning of the outside of the stones, but inside there, they wanted to go inside, but they were afraid they might get trapped. So because there was so much violence in Sodom and Gomorrah, God had to make an example to show future generations what would happen if you continued to sin. Things like murder, stealing, adultery, sorcery, sexual wickedness, idolatry, even rape were common things that were happening on a daily basis in these cities. So God had to make an example and rain fire and brimstone down upon them. So God sent 2 of his angels down to Sodom to see if he could find 10 righteous people, and if he could, he wouldn't burn the city to the ground. But guess what? He couldn't even find 10 people. He found Lot and his family, who were the only righteous family in the whole entire city. So what ended up happening is the 2 angels stayed with Lot's family overnight, and men gathered around the house and surrounded the house because they wanted to have sexual wicked things with these 2 angels. So Lot said, "Take my 2 daughters." And the men said, "No, we want the men." They had to have God intercede, and God blinded the first few people that were right next to the door. So the angels told Lot's family to run for their life to the mountains and get out of here, because it was about to be burned to the ground by God. So that's what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. There was corruption, there was murder, and every kind of immoral act that you can think of was taking place in that city. So God had to make an example of Sodom and Gomorrah so that future generations, thousands of years later, wouldn't make the same mistakes. So he rained fire and brimstone down upon the cities.
Before I started using this knife, it was very, very sharp. Okay, here this is, and we have collected some more, and it smells and tastes like sulfur. What we find here is that God rained this burning sulfur down upon this city, and rain is a perfect description of it. It landed just in the pattern that rain would fall, and the stuff, of course, the accumulative heat of all of this upon the city set the entire thing ablaze.
Now Ron's wife took one of those brimstone balls and put it into a spoon and lit it on fire, and guess what happened? It turned into a purple flame, which is a very intense flame, much more intense than a blue flame, and it burned a hole into the spoon, which tells you what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. These houses were vitrified because the metal and the stone burned. Next, Ron took a sample of the brimstone to Gulbrick Laboratories, where they discovered something very unique. These brimstone balls were actually made out of sulfur, and not just any sulfur, one of the purest forms of sulfur on Earth, 95.72% sulfur, which is extremely high for sulfur. You can't find it in its natural form that way. But it was so intense, the other elements inside there were so intense of a flame that they literally couldn't even test it for a BTU because it would burn up one of their machines. So they couldn't even do a BTU test.
Now once you become aware no end of these large blobs of sulfur. That particular one there is in the neighborhood of probably 10 to 15 pounds.
This is the Rock of Horeb, one of the most amazing places where a miracle took place from God. Moses was bringing 3 million Israelites out of Egypt, and we were in the middle of Saudi Arabia with no water. And they're standing there, and all these people are coming to Moses. We need water. We're dying of thirst. So Moses asked God, and God said, Moses, go up to the top of this mountain and see where that big rock is. I will be on top of that rock. And I want you to bring your rod with you, and I want you to tap that rock with your rod, and water's going to come forth so the people can drink. And sure enough, Moses went on top of the mount, stood next to this big gigantic rock, split that sucker right down the center with his rod, and water started pouring out of this gigantic rock in the middle of the desert. Okay, in Saudi Arabia, that doesn't happen. That's not normal. And as you can see, there's water erosion all around this area because millions of gallons of water came out of this very site, out of a rock. Only God can make miracles like that happen. The Israelites were there, and they just brought their pots and whatever they can to get the water, and literally took all the water they needed, because this water came flowing out of the center of that rock up there, and it came down to the bottom of this hill. And all of these rocks in this area all show signs of erosion from extreme amounts of water coming out of this rock. And imagine, again, there's no water in the area, and the water is coming out of the top of this hill. It makes absolutely no sense until you bring God into this. God can do absolutely anything. And again, Ron Wyatt is the one that discovered this rock formation. Nobody knew where the Rock of Horeb was until Ron discovered it. So Ron has discovered so many things. You have to stop and check and figure out what's really going on here. Ron was supernaturally guided by God to find all of these things. No person could have gone out in the desert and found this. It's out in the middle of the desert in a place where you would never go to. But Ron found this along with all the other things that he found. So this is absolute proof that the Bible is true, number one, and that Ron was divinely guided by God to find these things, to bring them out at this time when people need to know this information.
Hi, I'm Ron Wyatt. Welcome to the Ark of the Covenant dig.
600 years before Jesus Christ died on the cross, God had Jeremiah take the Ark of the Covenant and take it out of the first temple before it was destroyed by the invading armies. And he had him put it into a secret chamber in Jerusalem, 20 feet underground, in a location exactly underneath the cross where Jesus was crucified.
We've been working in this area since 1979, and shall we say it hasn't been an easy job. In 1982 we were able to get into the chamber where we saw some of the furnishings from the first temple. Now we accomplished that by going down through this hole here.
This is what the Ark of the Covenant looks like in real life. It's literally the throne of God. It weighs over 900 pounds, and it's made out of solid gold. Over to the right is what's known as the mercy seat. Over to the left is what's known as the testimony, where the 2 stone tablets that are written on that have the 10 commandments from God. Over to the right is what's known as God's testimony. That's because that red spot over to the left side of the mercy seat there is a blood stain from Jesus Christ when he died on the cross. The Ark of the Covenant is God's earthly throne here on earth. Now, when Ron Wyatt found the Ark of the Covenant, he didn't find it sitting inside this chamber all out in the open. It was actually inside a stone box that was about 5 feet wide, and as he peered down into the box, he clearly noticed this golden object that he recognized as the Ark of the Covenant. Now, as you come into the chamber, what you'll notice first is there's 2 levels. On the first level, there was gold objects that were covered up by skins, and then on the second level is where he actually found this stone sarcophagus that inside housed the Ark of the Covenant. the greatest archaeological find of all time. You saw the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark. Well, this is what they were looking for in that movie, was the Ark of the Covenant, the most precious object on earth today. Now, as Ron entered the chamber on the first level, he noticed the candlestick holder over in the corner there, covered up by some skins. And he also noticed some other furnishings from the first temple. All of these would have been destroyed by the invading armies unless Jeremiah had taken them out of the first temple and placed them in this secret chamber. Now, it's no accident that God had Jeremiah place all of these artifacts and the Ark of the Covenant exactly where they were placed, inside the secret chamber, over 600 years before Jesus was crucified on the cross. And the chamber, where this crack is in the top of the lid there, the stone sarcophagus, it was located exactly under the cross, about 20 feet underground, directly where Jesus was crucified on the cross. No accident. There's a reason, because when the blood dripped down the cross and into that crack, it literally went right down the crack, and the blood from Jesus Christ landed on the actual mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. This was no accident. This was planned out by God over 600 years before Jesus died on the cross. Now, when the blood hit the mercy seat, when the seventh drop of blood hit the mercy seat, all sin was forgiven for everyone who believes Jesus Christ is their Lord and Savior, and that He was the Messiah who came to earth to save everyone from hell. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. The only thing that forgives sins is blood. And when Jesus Christ's blood was coming out of his body, and the centurion stabbed him in the side with a spear, a lot of blood and some water from inside him dripped down the cross into the cross hole, and literally God made an earthquake happen the moment Jesus died, and a crack ran down through solid rock to the exact location where the ark was. And when the seventh drop of blood hit the ark, that's when everyone got saved. Now, after that, Ron had the blood analyzed. He took a sample from the mercy seat and he took it to 3 different laboratories all over the world. And what happened next was absolutely mind-blowing for the people who analyzed the blood. They found out that Jesus Christ's blood is supernatural blood. It only has 24 chromosomes. Most people here on earth have 46 chromosomes. So you get 23 chromosomes from your mother and 23 chromosomes from your father. But Jesus only had 23 chromosomes from his mother and only 1 chromosome from his father in heaven, which was a Y chromosome. That's what made him a male. So, ladies and gentlemen, his blood is supernatural, and it's still alive today in 2019. Now, this is another one of the items that was found inside this secret chamber, which is the holiest of holy places here on earth today. They found a gigantic sword that's literally 5 feet long. Now, this is Ron Wyatt and his wife, Mary Nell, and they're holding a replica made out of wood. The original sword that they found inside the chamber was actually made out of metal, and it probably weighed 100 pounds, maybe even up to 200 pounds. So can you imagine how large the being was that wielded a sword like this? It could have been of archangel or maybe even one of the cherubim. But this is a very amazing discovery to find something like this inside the chamber with all of the furnishings from the first temple. This is the site where Ron Wyatt found the Red Sea crossing. Now, when Moses was bringing the 3 million Israelites out of Egypt, he took them through this winding canyons out in the desert. Now, keep in mind, you have 3 million people that are slaves from Egypt. These Israelites were slaves over in Egypt, and they're right there on this beach, but they have nowhere to go, and the Egyptian army's right behind them. So Moses asked God, and he literally parted the sea, and they all walked across the Gulf of Aqaba, which is about a 10-mile trek to get across the Gulf of Aqaba to get over to Saudi Arabia. So can you imagine being right there on the beach and seeing 3 million people walk in between 2 gigantic waves that are on both sides of you? Egyptian army was right there on the beach to the left there, and they literally were after these people, these Israelites. They wanted to capture them because they were their slaves. So God made a fire hold the Egyptian army back so that the Israelites could walk safely across the 10-mile trek that it took to get across the Gulf of Aqaba over to safety in Saudi Arabia. So once the Israelites made it to safety on the other side, all 3 million of them made it across safely. The Egyptian army were let loose by God. The fire was evaporated, and the Egyptian army came hauling across that bottom of that seafloor, and they got about halfway across, and God stopped the waters from being parted, and all of that water came crashing down on their chariots. So these are chariot wheels that Ron Wyatt found on the bottom of the Gulf of Aqaba. Now, Ron found these amazing granite columns that you see before you here down in the actual water, down by where the water was, and he notified the officials, and they took it a little bit more inland and stood it upright right here, what you see here. But this was made by King Solomon to mark where Moses had the Red Sea crossing, where he parted the seas. Now this is Mount Sinai, where Moses took the Israelites after they went across the Gulf of Aqaba. When Moses parted the sea, they went to Saudi Arabia, where Mount Sinai is located, and this is where God descended upon earth on top of this mountain and literally wrote the 10 Commandments in stone on 2 stone tablets. Now you'll notice that the top of the mountain looks kind of darkish. Well, that's because God descended into fire on top of the mountain. So it literally scorched the top of the mountain. And when he did that, the earth quaked and the Israelites were shaking in their boots because God was speaking to them, and he literally laid the law down to them. He told them exactly what the 10 Commandments were, and they were to keep his commandments. But as you clearly can see, the top part of the mountain is literally blackish looking, and that's because it was scorched by fire. And God loved his children so much that he had to discipline them, because these were sinners. There were 3 million people at the base of Mount Sinai. So basically, he came down as fire to put the fear of God into these people so that they stopped sinning. Now, this stone formation was actually an altar that Ron discovered in Saudi Arabia at the base of Mount Sinai, because all the Israelites were not allowed to go up on Mount Sinai because they'd be too close to God, and literally they could die by just being in God's presence. But because Moses took like 40 days to come down with the 10 Commandments, a lot of the Israelites went back to their old pagan ways, and they started worshiping idols, and they literally got everyone to put rings, gold rings and gold bracelets and necklaces into a pot, and they literally melted down all the gold and made an idol out of a calf. They literally made a calf that they started worshiping on top of this rock formation right here. So when Moses came back down off the mountain, God had told them that they're worshiping idols down there, and God was furious, and he wanted to literally take all the Israelites out. But Moses talked God down from doing that. Now Moses was so upset that he threw the 10 Commandments down on the ground and broke the stone tablets right away, and ran up on top of this altar, grabbed this golden calf that was basically a cow. So Moses grinded the actual golden calf into a rock until it became little flakes of gold, and threw those flakes of gold into the river. So God hates idolatry when you worship images or idols. Now, after Ron had discovered this site, the Saudi Arabians fenced in this whole area where the altar is because of these 4,000-year-old petroglyphs of golden calves. Okay, they wanted to memorialize it, and basically, if you look closely, you can see these are Egyptian petroglyphs. So someone in that group of 3 million Israelites was doing these calf petroglyphs right there on the stone altar.
On June 20th, 1987, in the mountains of Ararat, Turkey officially recognized the discovery of Noah's Ark. Located on a mountainside about 15 miles south of the volcanic Mount Ararat, the remains of the massive ship were dedicated during a special ceremony. Guest of honor was Ron Wyatt, due to his 10 years of research at the site. The story began in 1957 during the Cold War, when aerial photos taken of eastern Turkey while searching for Soviet missile bases revealed a strange boat-shaped formation in the mountains about 6,300 feet above sea level. Life magazine reported on the story after an expedition from the United States.
Keep walking. Do you want a measuring tape to measure these things, how far apart they are?
Now, they started off using metal detectors to find the nails and the metal brackets that were holding all of the framework together in the ship. Then they went to subsurface interface radars that could penetrate the earth even deeper. And they found all of the timbers. And you clearly can see that there is a very clear pattern here of a ship that's about 500 feet long. And this is clearly Noah's Ark.
There's the key line right there.
Yeah.
All right, the lines are there. The lines are there. Now, this is the west bulkhead. Okay, can you look through there and?
All right.
This is the west bulkhead.
All right.
That was over there, and he walked easterly. Here we start getting the longitudinal bulkheads. Here, 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 here.
Okay.
Here. You see there how it shows up?
Right.
The initial scans were very impressive, showing internal structure consistent with bulkheads and rooms. But to be sure they were interpreting the data correctly, Ron took the scan printouts to Geophysical Survey Systems, the developer and manufacturer of the radar.
This data does not represent natural geology. It's a man-made structure. These reflections are occurring very periodic, too periodic to be random natural type interface.
He noted the biblical account of the location of the ark. And the ark rested in the 7th month on the 17th day of the month upon the mountains of Ararat.
This type anchor stone is a very familiar object to the students of early navigation. They were used by many of the early civilizations, the Phoenicians in particular, and the shores of the Mediterranean and the floor of the Mediterranean is strewn with these stones. The difference that becomes obvious immediately is the difference in size.
This is deck timber that was taken from near the back of Noah's Ark. Ron found this on the radar scan. This area right here appears to be a silica replacement of the glue that was used to glue these boards or laminate these boards together, and some of it has seeped out the side.
Now, I know there's a lot of people out there that are thinking to themselves, if that's the real Noah's Ark, then how did Noah get all the animals on the actual ark? I mean, how did that happen? Well, in reality, it probably was baby animals. Like if the elephants weren't giant elephants, they were baby elephants, maybe just a few months old. And they got 2 by 2. How did they get them 2 by 2 onto the actual ark? And some of them, they got 7 of them, okay? Unclean animals, they only got 2. So the thing is, how did they do that? Well, Noah didn't do it. God did it, because God can supernaturally guide the animals to the actual ark, and that's exactly the way it happened. God actually intervened and made the animals come to the ark instead of Noah having to go out and find the animals and then bring them to the ark. Now, this is the actual crosshole plug that Ron found in the actual hole where Jesus Christ was crucified. When they stuck the wooden cross into the stone, they actually had to dig into solid stone about 2.5 feet into the stone. And when they finished, they put this crosshole plug in the stone hole to keep debris from going down into the crosshole. Now, in order to find the actual crosshole, he had to go underground. And this is just an amazing story. Ron happened to be walking by this one day with an Israeli diplomat, and his arm literally raised up supernaturally, and he pointed his finger over to where they're standing over there, and he said, "This is where Jeremiah's grotto is, and the Ark of the Covenant is inside there." Now, the Israeli diplomat looked at him like, "What?" And he said, "Hey, you're welcome to come dig here anytime you want." God literally wanted Ron to find the Ark of the Covenant.
What I discovered when I started excavating down that cliff wall, first of all, I discovered the cutouts in the wall of the cliff where they had posted the signs.
Now the cross hole is actually right straight down below where we set this thing up. And of course this is the chamber that you've been looking around through with us as we worked. You see some dark pigmented material. Now this appears to be dried blood. Take it back and have it analyzed to see if it is blood. Now this is right under the cutouts where Christ was crucified and near the cross hole.
I never said that. I said the angel told me to take the tables of stone out of the Ark of the Covenant, and the four of them took hold of the corners of the mercy seat and lifted it so that I could get to the tables of stone in the Ark of the Covenant. I took them out, backed away. They set the mercy seat back down on the Ark of the Covenant, and I just stood there. And the angel came and took the tables of stone and put them on a stone shelf in the chamber. And that's where they are at this point in time. That's also where the video is. They're out of the Ark of the Covenant, but they're not out of the chamber, unless the angels did something with them after I left. See, they're not obliged to tell me everything they do. After all, they're God's angels.
God supernaturally guided Ron Wyatt to find all of these locations and items on this list. He did that for a reason, because we're living in the end times, and what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah is going to happen in our lifetime right here on earth. Stars are going to fall from the sky to earth and burn up a large portion of earth, and a new earth and a new heaven will be made, but only for those who believe in Jesus Christ. So it's imperative that you ask Jesus Christ to be your Lord and Savior as soon as possible. Why not do that today? Jesus supernaturally let me know that He's very real and that He will save you. He's done that for me. He will protect you in these end times. But you have to ask for Him to be your Lord and Savior.